Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Piyush and this is video number 7 in the series CK 2024. And in this video, we'll be looking into pod and the fundamentals of YAML, because YAML is the language that we'll be using throughout this series and it is heavily used in Kubernetes. I think this would be a good time to introduce you to YAML and provide you some basic fundamentals of it, how to use it, what's the best practices, and how to make sure that you are aware about all the syntax and everything inside the YAML. And also we'll be looking into pod, because from this video onwards we'll be starting the complete hands-on. So we'll be looking into all that, and let's start the video with the introduction and then we'll move ahead with that. Okay, so I hope you remember this diagram that we discussed in the fundamentals of Kubernetes video. Basically, a user interacts with an API server which resides in a control plane node or a master node, and the user interacts with the help of a client utility such as kubectl, or if it's a managed service, it will be the cloud console or any other client utility. But for Kubernetes series, we'll be mostly using the kubectl client utility. And so user interacts with API server with kubectl to provision something on the cluster, to update something, to delete something, or to get some details from the cluster, right? So let's say user run create pod command. Actually, create pod is not a command, it's kubectl run pod. But let's just say user is trying to create a pod on the Kubernetes cluster. The pod resides over here in one of the worker nodes, right? So this is what we'll be doing. But before that, let's quickly have a look at this diagram, right? So here's your Kubernetes cluster. Inside that, you have to, run a pod. Pod, let's say you need to run an Nginx pod. Okay, so I'm just gonna add Nginx over here. So this will be running as a pod in the Kubernetes cluster. Add a text as well over here. Okay. Now to run a pod or to run a workload, because running your workload on the containers or on the pod is the main purpose why you are using Kubernetes, right? And this is what you'll be doing a lot of time. So there are different ways through which you can create the pod. So there are like two type of ways that you can use. First is imperative. Let's call it imperative. And the second way is declarative. I'll explain each one of those. Just give me a second. Okay. So in imperative, in which you run simple commands such as kubectl run pod, or basically you are instructing your API server or you are instructing your kubectl utility that do this, run that, get these details, and so on. So this is something like running a command as kubectl run nginx. Okay, so that's what you do as part of the imperative workflow. Now, to use declarative, okay, you actually create a file, a configuration file. That configuration file could be, let's say, in JSON format, or it could be YAML, right? YAML is something that is heavily used in Kubernetes, and I hardly know anyone who uses JSON, but it is supported. So you can use JSON or YAML, they both are supported and they both has their own syntax. So we're looking into that. But what you will do as part of the declarative workflow, you create a configuration file, and in that configuration file, you set the desired state of the object. Let's say you create a file, and then in that file you define, okay, I need to use this API version, I need to create the pod with this name, with this image exposed on this port number, and so on. So you define everything in your configuration file, and then basically you run kubectl create or apply command, right? So that's the two ways, the two main ways of creating or interacting with your cluster via kubectl utilities. And we'll be looking into both of those, and you have to understand, you have to know all like both of those, because they both are equally important. And uh, even if you are working somewhere, let's just keep exam aside for now. Even if you are working somewhere, you use both of these kubectl, run nginx, or get pods, or these commands are used to basically troubleshoot if there is any issue, or if something that is wrong with the cluster, or if you are doing it as a local deployment, or not doing on the production. But declarative way is something that you use as part of your production deployments, your CI/CD. It also is applicable in GitOps and so on, right? So both of them are equally important, and you should know both of those. So let's start with the imperative one, deploying an nginx pod on the cluster. So I'm gonna go on my VS Code, right? And here is, I have created a README file over here so that I could just write something over here if I have to explain. And here is my terminal window. I hope this is not too small, but let me ease this bit. So now let's just try to create an nginx pod. Okay, I'm just gonna write over here what I'm doing. So create an nginx pod. Okay, through kubectl imperative way. Now, so for that, you run kubectl run and the name of the pod, right? Nginx in this case, or I can give nginx pod just to be clear. And then hyphen image equal to nginx and optional tag. Like if you have a tag, you can specify it over here. Once you hit enter, your pod will be created if your command is right, if you have provided the correct image name and everything is right, right? So let's hit enter. Created. So now it says it's created. Let's run kubectl get pods. And I see the pod is in running state. It directly don't go into the running state. It goes into container creating and then running. Okay. So now over here as well, the important thing to remember is it says ready one on one. What that means is the pod that we have created, it has one container, and out of those one container, one is running, right? So this is important to look at when we have multiple containers in a pod. Well, we'll have a separate video for that, but for now, just understand that there could be multiple containers in a pod. These could be the helper containers or the init containers, or containers that do some specific task, and then they just keep on running, or then it gets completed. Okay, so if there were two containers inside it, it could be two on one or two on two, depending on how many containers are up and running, right? So that's what we do with that. Now let's try to understand the basics of YAML, okay? Because the second way that we'll be using is the declarative way, and we'll be looking into a lot more commands. So let's have a look at the declarative way. I'm just gonna create a new YAML file inside this folder. Let's call it day7 YAML.yaml. Okay, the other thing to remember is YAML file can be of either of those two extension .yaml, the one that I've just used, or .yml. They both are one and the same thing. So you can use either of those. So let's create the YAML. And why we are using YAML? Because it is super easy to use. It is clean and very intuitive, right? So mostly we'll be using YAML as the configuration language, or as the serialized language. That's what it's called. And we'll be using that throughout the Kubernetes series. And it is widely used in many other tools like Prometheus. We have Docker Compose and many other tools and utilities. YAML is the preferred way of using a configuration file. Okay, let's take an example and then it will be clear. Okay, so I'll start with this. So you can add comments in YAML with the hash sign. So let's call it, this is a comment, right? And this will not be executed as part of your YAML, because it identified it as a comment because we have used the hash sign in front of it. Now YAML support different data types. It supports list, supports dictionary, string, integer, and a lot more. right? So we'll have a look at a few of the examples. So let's say you have a field called spec. Okay. Okay, I'm just gonna keep it over here. So this is spec is nothing but a dictionary. It will have various fields inside it. So I'm not explaining this on Kubernetes terms. This is just a normal example. Or let's just call it employee. Okay. Then I added a colon and hit enter. After that, everything that goes inside this. So if it would have been a JSON, we would have used something like this syntax, right? And enter anything over here like name, age, and so on. But in YAML, what we do is we do it with the help of indentation and spaces. So you can use a double space, single space, or even a tab. Tab is not recommended because it just make your YAML file clumsy. So I'm gonna go ahead with double spaces. So I have just put double spaces over here. Then let's say name. Okay, I'll just give it a name. Even if it is a string, I don't have to put that in double quotes, or you can put that in double quotes. It's totally up to your wish. Then age, let's say 4, and then we have address, so 107, so something like that. So the way I wanted to explain it takes care of string, integer, a float, anything, right? Any supported data type it supports, but you have to take care of spaces and indentation. So for example, if you do like this, it will not add age inside the employee. It will create a separate field called age, right? And then this syntax will be wrong over here, right? So make sure you take care of spaces and indentation in that. Now you can also have a list data type, right? So for that you need to add a dash inside the value, right? And then you have to indent this again to the same line basically, because this is a list. It could have many values. So I'm just gonna copy this and paste this over here, right? And at the same level, let's use another name. Okay, another value 1.8. Okay, something like that. So now it became a list, employer list with two values. One is this, second is this, and its respective fields. So this is how it takes care of the lists. You can have sublist as well. So for example, in the address field, let's remove this. So inside address, you can add, let's say, sublist. So you can add your old address, and you can also add your new address. So something like this. So you can have nested data types as well. You can have at the top directory. It doesn't matter. If you are using a supported data type, it should be okay for that. Now, what we've looked at is the basic syntax of YAML. It was not from the Kubernetes perspective. Let's have a look at what we do as part of Kubernetes YAML configuration files. So I'm just gonna remove this. Okay. So let's put the comment tag. This is a sample pod YAML, right? Okay. So let's start with that. It has 4 top level fields. First is your API version. Then you have kind. Then you have your metadata, and then you have your spec. Okay. Now, the other thing to remember, I intentionally made a mistake. Other thing to remember, this is case sensitive. So you have to use the format that it supports. So for example, it should be API server with a small a, kind, and then metadata, and then spec is also small as. Now, because this is a pod, the version is v1. I'll tell you how you can verify the version later on, or maybe let's do that. So when you run this command kubectl run pod, let's clear the screen. And if you run kubectl explain pod, okay, and if you go at the very top, it will show you, the kind and version of the pod that you can use. right? So these versions could be, beta, alpha, or v1, v2, and so on. So you have to use the one that is supported or one of the supported versions, right? So you can run this command to verify what are the versions available for that particular object. Because this is just a sample YAML for a pod, will have a similar for deployment, replica set, service, and many more objects, right? So make sure you are aware of this command. So let's go back. The kind is pod. Again, it should be with capital P. That's how it should be. And in metadata, we have different fields such as your name. Again, make sure you indent it properly. Name. And let's give this a name, Nginx pod. Then we have also fields called labels at the same level. Right, and let's give this a name. Environment is demo. Okay. Now, remember this, inside metadata or inside spec, we only specify the field that it supports, right? But inside labels, you can have any key value pair, that you want your app to be associated with, right? So you can add multiple labels as well. So let's say environment is demo and type is, let's call it front end. Okay, so it supports anything. Now let's go inside spec, and in spec you basically specify other details such as your containers. Okay, it will have one container, but it could be a list, so that is why you are specifying it with dash. So name of the container is Nginx container, and then image is Nginx. Okay, and then we can have ports on which it will be exposed. So ports is a sublist with container port as the field, and the port number is 80. Okay, so this is, let's say, a sample pod YAML. Make sure you don't let's say if you do labels at the same level, it'll be wrong, right? So make sure you take care of indentation and spaces. And these four are the top level properties, or yeah, top level properties: API version, kind, metadata, and spec, right? And then inside that it goes containers and different containers, and then different specification. There'll be a lot more, but this is just a basic hello world sort of pod YAML. And I will also show you how you can, you don't have to remember everything. I'll show you how you can create your own YAML. But for now, let's just save this file. Okay. And let's clear the screen and let's see where the file is. I'm in day 7. Okay. So day 7 YAML.yaml. Let's rename it. So I'm gonna rename it with 7 YAML.yaml to pod.yaml. Okay. Now I'm gonna use kubectl create -f and the name of the file pod.yaml. Okay, so you can also use apply instead of create. Apply can be used to create or update the resource, right? But we are creating, we can use create or apply. That's totally fine. So if we hit enter, it says the pod already exists. So we have to clean up the existing pod. For that, kubectl delete pod nginx, or we can rename this pod. That's totally fine too. I just wanted to show you how you can delete the pod as well. So kubectl delete pod and the name of the pod. Hit enter. It was nginx-pod. It's deleted. Now let's clear the screen and run the create command again. And it says pod created. Now kubectl get pods. Okay, it's running. Now there are many other commands that I would like to introduce over here. Okay, so now let's say this had some issues, right? Let me just corrupt this. So I'll just open the file kubepi pod.yaml and I'll just make a change over here to the image. Let's misspell it. Okay, 123. And I'll save it, and I'm gonna apply this again. kubectl apply -f and then pod.yaml. Okay, it says pod is missing last configuration, the missing annotation. Okay, it says configured. So the first one is a warning message which you can ignore, but it says pod configured. Now let's say if it is created, get pods, and you see over here the container ready is 0 of 1 because the pod has one container specification and that is not ready. And it says the error is image pull back off. That means it is facing issues while pulling the Nginx image from the Docker Hub registry that we have specified. So to troubleshoot this, what you can do is kubectl describe pod and then the name of the pod. Okay. So now when you do that, it will show you the error in the latest events, right? So if you see the error, it says, I'm sure it is visible. Yeah, it is visible. So it says failed to pull and unpack image from Docker Hub, says pull access denied, or repository does not exist or may require authorization, insufficient authorization. That means either there is a mistake in your image or tag, or you don't have permissions to pull the image. Because we were using a public image, so it should not ask us for authentication. The next is we could have some error in the image. Okay, so let's see how we can resolve it. There was one way which we have already used, in which we basically what we did, we updated the YAML and applied it. There is another way which you can directly update the object on the cluster itself. So kubectl added pod and then the name of the pod, nginx-pod. Okay, and it will open a vi sort of editor. So you go ahead and you make the change, because we know that image is not correct. That is why it is showing the image pullback of error. I'm just gonna make the change over here and I'll save it with wq exclamation, and it says pod edited. I don't have to apply the change again because I have made the change directly on the running pod itself. So if I do a get pod again, it's running. And if I do a describe pod again, it says, so the error is the one that we faced earlier. Now it did not show any error. This is not the latest error. Okay. So we don't have any errors at this moment because it's, 1 minute old. And if you hit enter again, yeah, you don't see any error now. Now, the next command is, let's say we have to get inside this pod. So if you remember how we get inside the Docker or open an interactive shell with that, we use similar command kubectl exec -it for interactive mode. And then the name of the container, name of the pod, which is nginx pod -, and the command. So let's say we are using sh. So we'll be using sh over here. And once we do that, we are inside the container now. So let's pwd at the root directory. And here are all the details. So you can check logs and anything that you would want to check. Okay. I'm gonna do exit now. And let's clear the screen. Now I said I'm gonna show you how you can create your own YAML, because this is a simple YAML. So maybe you know about the structure, which field goes where, what, when the complexity increases, when we have a lot of fields, hundreds of lines of YAML code, then it will be difficult to type everything, and it is a time consuming task. So for that, what you can do is you can write your imperative command, and then you can output that in a YAML format. I'll show you. So let's say you run kubectl run nginx, okay, and images nginx. I mean, this one is what we did already. So along with that, you add dry run equal to client, dry run equal to client. Okay, now this will dry run. That means it will not apply the changes. It will just show you what will happen when you run it without dry run. Okay, So it says pod created, but this is a dry run. Like if you apply this command, it will create the pod. That's what it's saying. Now, what you can do is with this dry run, you can output it to a YAML like -o YAML. That means share me the output of this in a YAML format. To do that, here is the YAML for you, right? The one that we created manually, it will create for you automatically. And then you can make your changes in that YAML. Like this is pretty neat, right? And you can then redirect it to a YAML file, let's say pod new.yaml, and you have to use this greater than sign to redirect the input of this command, the entire command, to a new file. So pod new.yaml and hit enter. Now pod new.yaml has been created. Click on that. You make some changes like you don't need creation timestamp, okay, and label, it has a run label, or you can change it, let's say env demo. Name is nginx, fine. Image name nginx, and you don't need these fields, so you can remove it. And basically that's it. Now you can go ahead and apply this YAML. It should be good enough, right? So this is how you can create the YAML. And the other thing is, remember I said it also supports JSON format. So in the same command, instead of -o YAML, you can do .json, okay, over here as well, and it will generate a pod new.json file. So it will be in the JSON format with everything inside curly braces instead of the spaces and line breaks. But it will also have the same format, like it will have kind, API version, metadata, and spec. The four top level fields that we talked about, right? It will have the same thing. Okay. So now if we look at the pod YAML, like any of the pod YAML that we created now or earlier, that's fine. They both are basically the same one. So if you look at that, spec and metadata, these two are the dictionary data type. And we have containers, which is a list. We have ports, which is also a list, and it is a sort of a sublist inside container. And then we have many key value pairs and so on, right? So it supports these many data types. So that's okay. And you can use your VA editor or any other text editor that it supports. You can also use a code IDE such as Visual Studio Code or anything that you are comfortable with. In the exam, you might not get VS Code or anything, so you have to work on the terminal. So make sure you do enough hands-on on the VI editor. And it's not just for the exam. VI editor is something that goes a long way. It will be helpful for you to run a few shortcuts to do the hands-on on VI editor whenever you get time. It will be very helpful. Okay, now let's look at few more commands. I'm gonna clear the screen. Let's say now you run kubectl get pods and you want to know all the information about this pod, like where it is running, on which node it is running, and a few other details. So for that, what you can do is you can run the command kubectl describe, okay, pod nginx pod, okay. And if you scroll up, it will show you all the details like condition is ready, pod is scheduled, containers are ready, and it has ready is true. Then last state ports 80 is the exposed port, and then this is using the nginx image with this image ID. And then let's see what else, name, namespace, and this is running on this particular worker node and so on. It has these many labels, all right. So labels are really helpful to group your resources together. Let's say if you have hundreds of pods running and you want to know what all the pods are part of front end application. So you can just retrieve the information by using the label tag, right? And if you want to see how you can see the labels of a particular object or a particular pod, you can run kubectl get pods nginx pod hyphen hyphen show labels. Okay, it will show you the labels on the very right side. It has two labels, env demo and type is front end. Okay, now let's say you want to also know which node your pod is running. We have seen that from the describe command, but let's say you have multiple pods and you just want to have a glance at where all the pods are running. So for that you run kubectl get pods -o wide. Okay, -o wide will show you that all the information, like extended information about the get pods command. So earlier, if you have a look at the difference between these two commands, get pods, earlier it was showing you name, ready, status, restart, and age. Now it added few more details with the -o wide. It added the IP, okay, and it added the node as well on which it is running. So node CKA cluster 2 worker 2. So this is the node. You can use -o wide in the get nodes command as well. So let me show you. First, let's run kubectl get nodes. Okay, now it will show you these 5 fields. If you add -o wide in front of it, it will show you a few other details like its Linux version and like its OS image, kernel version, container runtime, few other details. And its external IP as well, which is sometimes very handy in case you are troubleshooting something. Right, so let's clear the screen now. I think we have covered everything as part of this particular video. Now I have a couple of assignments for you so that you can do the hands-on whatever we did in this video. So I'll provide the details in the GitHub repository, don't worry. Here's the task. So there are actually 3 tasks. First is, I hope this is visible. Okay. Okay, so first is create the pod using imperative command and use nginx as the image. Second task is create the YAML from nginx task created in the task 1 and update the pod name and use that to create a new pod. The task 3 is fix this YAML and then apply the changes and basically follow all the troubleshooting steps that we did. Okay, so try to do that and let us know in the comment if you are facing any issues with implementing it, or we have the community support as well, so try to help each other in the community channel. There is a dedicated channel for CK which would be helpful in case you want to help someone or if you want to get some help. People will always be there to help you. So with that being said, thank you so much for watching the video. I'm sure you have found it valuable and you have learned something new today. So if you did, give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends, family and colleagues and whoever you think could take advantage of this learning opportunity. Please spread the word and we need your support. Try to complete the target for this video. The target for this video is 150 comments and 250 likes in the next 24 hours. So please do that so that I could stay motivated and I could keep publishing videos at every other day. So I will see you soon with the next video. Thank you so much for watching. In the next video, we'll be covering deployments and replica sets. So we'll be doing a lot of hands-on and a lot of concepts we'll be looking at. So thank you so much and I will see you then. Thank you.